Afternoon, time for chapter 23 of Frost Hollow Hall. This chapter's called Lady Barrington's Plan. We came out into the main hallway. Mrs. Jessup kept a firm grip on me, rushing me along so my feet barely touched the floor. "Please, just listen, will you?" I cried. It wasn't fair. None of this was fair. I twisted and turned till my arm burned, but her grip held fast as a vice. Before I knew it, I was raging. "Let go! Get your stinking hands off me!" She didn't so much as flinch, but marched me up a different set of stairs towards the back of the house. It was gloomy here, all narrow passages and uneven floors. What gas lamps there were gave off a strange greenish light. As we stopped in front of a door, Mrs. Jessup tapped on it with her free hand. "Come in," said Lady Barrington's voice from inside. Mrs. Jessup told me to wait where I was. The door clicked shut behind her. I leaned against the wall, head spinning, heart still beating way too fast. Here I was now in deep, deep trouble, just for speaking the truth. That was the problem with this place. Nobody wanted to listen. I stared hard at the door. Bet Mrs. Jessup was in there, painting a right picture of me. So, I could wait here and be told to pack my bags, or I could just go. Right now. I'd be back home by midnight. I set off down the passage. Halfway along it, I stopped. What good would it do to run off like some snivelling baby? It wouldn't help anyone. Not Ma, not Kit, not even me. I thought of my dream last night and the smile on Kit's face. That's what I had to think of, not the pinching fingers or the broken plates. Kit's spirit couldn't rest. If he was ever to be at peace, then I had to find the truth, and I had to make people listen. The answer lay in this house, I knew it. That's why I was here. Behind me I heard a door open. Mrs. Jessup called out, "I told you to wait right here." I turned to see her beckoning me. "Now come quickly, her ladyship hasn't got all night." We stepped into a bright parlour. There were lamps everywhere and mirrors reflecting back each little ball of light, so the room was almost dazzling. Lady Barrington was sitting on a sofa near to the hearth. She was dressed for dinner in a black frock, this time with the brooch pinned to her chest, next to her heart. She seemed recovered enough from this morning, though she still had that faraway look in her eyes. I felt my own heart thudding. I hoped to God this wouldn't take long. To the right of me, Lord Barrington got up from his chair. He looked so much like Kit it was a job to keep my eyes down. He hardly noticed me, of course, speaking over my head to Mrs. Jessup. "Let Samuel know he'll need to pack for me, would you? I'll be catching the morning train." "Oh, darling, must you go away again?" Lady Barrington reached out to him, and he took her hand. They made such a handsome couple, what with her so dark and him so fair. I knew I was staring now, but I couldn't help myself. "I'm needed in London. Why don't you hold a little gathering, perhaps? It would do you good, keep you entertained." "Oh, no." She looked up at him from under her lashes. "I don't feel up to that." "Well, Mrs. Jessup is waiting to talk to you. I'll be in the library." Once he'd gone, Mrs. Jessup nudged me forwards. I caught sight of myself in a mirror and saw what a state I looked. My apron was still wet and my hair was escaping from under my cap. Too late to fix it now. "Please be brief," said Lady Barrington. Mrs. Jessup squared her shoulders. "Matters have come to a head, your ladyship. Our finest china has been broken on more than one occasion this week. I've got it all written down." And she opened that notebook of hers like some fancy detective who was about to solve a crime. "Couldn't Mr. Phelps deal with this?" said Lady Barrington, stifling a yawn. "But the staff are full of such silly talk, your ladyship. They're blaming—" Mrs. Jessup hesitated. "Well, I think it would be best if you heard about it." "Oh, and why is Matilda here? Is she the culprit?" I couldn't stop myself. "No, your ladyship, it ain't me." "Quiet, child. No one asked you to speak," said Mrs. Jessup. "Well, it ain't silly talk." I knew I sounded pert, but I wasn't right. All this looking for someone to blame. "Do you know who is responsible then?" said Lady Barrington. "Not exactly." "Are you covering for someone?" "I think she is, your ladyship," Mrs. Jessup chipped in. "She's full of foolish ideas." I counted to 5 in my head, then said, calm as I could, "I ain't covering for no one, your ladyship. On my pa's life, I ain't." Lady Barrington gave me a long look. I told her too much about my family this morning. She seemed to recall it now. I think you'd better leave in the morning, Matilda. That's if Mrs. Jessup can manage without you. I felt sick. Now it had come to it, I was desperate to stay. Mrs. Jessup breathed in sharply, and I saw her hand go to her throat as if her collar was too tight. We both started speaking at once. No, please don't make me go. Really, your ladyship, a firm warning is all she needs. Stop, both of you, Lady Barrington cried. You're giving me a headache. I looked at Mrs. Jessup. Her expression was blank as stone again. Just tell me the truth, said Lady Barrington more gently this time, and then I'll decide. If someone is deliberately breaking my china, I have a right to an explanation at the very least. Though my mouth was dry as sand, I reckoned she should hear the truth. It was up to her if she refused to believe what I said. We think it's a sprite, some sort of ghost. Mrs. Jessup spluttered. Lady Barrington, though, looked completely stunned. She turned paler than ever and gripped the sides of her seat. I feared she was having another of her turns. Then, like the sun coming out from the clouds, her whole face lit up. For a long while she didn't speak. You must tell me more, she said eventually. I swallowed hard. It comes at night and smashes cups and plates, and it gets us maids into trouble, and it follows us up the back stairs in the dark. Lady Barrington sat forward in her seat. Her eyes looked huge. And this spirit, as you call it, does it take a form? Does it ever appear as a person? Your ladyship, please, interrupted Mrs. Jessup. This is exactly my point. But don't you realise it could be him, at last? No, not this, said Mrs. Jessup, shaking her head. By now, Lady Barrington was on her feet. It is him. It has to be him. I felt uneasy too. Did we really know the spirit was Kit? I was beginning to have my doubts. But Lady Barrington seemed almost beside herself, and I didn't fancy being the one to dash her hopes. 10 years I've waited for a sign from him, said Lady Barrington. 10 whole years. I stared at her. 10 years. Did she really say 10 years? Shocked and bewildered as I was, I fought to keep it from my face. Yet my head started spinning. So Kit hadn't haunted his mother in all this time? And yet he'd saved my life and appeared in my dreams, all in the last flipping week? 10 years her ladyship had been waiting, and for nothing. Yet there was a ghost here, all right, here in this very house. Lost to my thoughts, I hadn't reckoned on Mrs. Jessup. I realised now she was watching me closely. Me, a nobody from the village, who dreamed of Kit Barrington while his own dear mother kept a fire burning in the mad hope that it might bring him back from the dead. My mind reeled. Why me? Why not Lady Barrington? Either way, I couldn't take my eyes off her ladyship. She had a hand to her mouth. Her gaze darted this way and that, as if she was thinking like fury. Then she said, "We shall have a séance. We must summon him." I gasped. "If you say so, your ladyship, that is not a good idea," said Mrs. Jessup grimly. "Of course it is," cried Lady Barrington. "It's the very best idea." The thought of a séance turned my stomach too, but I couldn't ignore the thrill running through me. In fact, I could barely keep still. "It'll do nothing to settle those things below stairs," Mrs. Jessup was saying. "Those girls are coiled springs. What they need is a stop put to all this." Lady Barrington didn't seem to be listening. She was almost feverish with excitement. Mrs. Jessup tried again. "And do you think his lordship would approve?" "My husband advised me to hold a gathering in his absence," said Lady Barrington, her eyes glittering. "Besides, I'll thank you to know your place." Mrs. Jessup blinked, slowly, once, twice. She looked defeated. "Very good, your ladyship." "That's settled then," said Lady Barrington. "We'll need a cold supper and some wine to steady our nerves. This will be our little party. No footman. Let's do it tomorrow evening." It took a moment or two to sink in. Then it came back to me why I was here. The small matter of my job. I smoothed my pinny and waited, praying her ladyship wouldn't turn me out now. I'd die if I got sent home before tomorrow. Only she seemed to have forgotten all about me and sat staring into the fire. Will that be all, your ladyship? Said Mrs. Jessup. Her ladyship started. Oh, for now, yes. But what about me? I blurted out. What's to become of me? Mrs. Jessup stiffened. Oh, yes, of course, said Lady Barrington, and passed a hand over her eyes. My legs were shaking again. She couldn't send me home, not now. Very well, we'll keep you. Mrs. Jessup will need you to serve tomorrow night. This is your last chance to prove yourself. Thank you, oh, thank you, I cried. But she'd already turned away and was gazing into the flames. When I got back to the kitchens, Cook looked surprised to see me. Gracie leapt up from her stool and flung her arms round my neck. Thought you was for the chop, said Cook. I ain't never seen Mrs. Jessup so angry. This is my last chance, and I shall probably keep my gob shut more often too. Cook chuckled at this. She gave us each a candle for the back stairs and wished us good night. We went quickly, and though nothing followed us, Gracie still held my hand all the way up and got into bed beside me, even before I'd asked her. So did you tell her ladyship about the spirit, she said. Yes. And did she believe you? I should say so. You ain't half brave. I ain't got the guts to even talk to her. I didn't feel brave in the slightest, and I didn't feel like mentioning the séance neither, which I knew would stir her up. It could wait until morning. We lay side by side without speaking, and after a bit Gracie turned over. I listened to her breathing change. Soon she was sound asleep. I stared up at the ceiling for a good while longer. My head buzzed with all it was holding in. Her ladyship, I reckoned, wasn't quite what she seemed. She was charming and lovely, but artful with it, like someone used to getting her own way. And it unsettled me still how she grieved for Kit, like he'd died only yesterday, as if she didn't quite believe he was gone. But then I couldn't blame her. I knew what it felt like to miss someone, even when you were angry with them, even when you wanted to shout at them hard. You hoped it might be just a nasty dream, that when you woke up, they'd be there again and everything would be back to normal. Except it didn't work like that. Each morning I woke to another day without my pa, and he'd only been missing for 5 days, not 10 whole years. Though God help us if this séance went wrong. It really didn't bear thinking about. Next section is Dreaming 5. Above our heads the cracks appear. Daylight seeps in, turning the water smoky grey. Kit looks up. The light is on his face. I still can't believe he's not an angel. A sudden light startles us. Trees and blue sky loom above us. The ice has splintered. The sun pours in. I start laughing out loud. I can't help it. I'm brimming over with joy. I start to swim upwards. But something isn't right. Kit's not beside me. I look round and see him bewildered some feet below. He can't move. He reaches out for my hand, starts shaking his head. This is as far as he can go. I take his outstretched fingers. They feel colder than ever. I start to shake. Ever so slowly we sink back down to the darker water. The chill of it hits my feet, my legs, my waist. I don't understand what's happening. I thought we were nearly free of this place. But as he turns to me, his eyes are full of something I can't quite read. Chapter 24. The Emptiness. I woke with a start. It was the middle of the night still, the moon shining in through the window. Gracie was asleep beside me. Nothing looked amiss, yet dread grew in the pit of my stomach. I pulled the covers right up to my chin. Someone else was here in the room. Kit, I whispered, is that you? No one answered, and yet the bedroom door began to open. My heart gave a painful thud. I sat up, rubbing my eyes and wondering if this was still a dream. From the landing came the sound of footsteps. They were light and quick. I knew them at once. The spirit was back. Hand shaking, I reached for our candle. Once it was lit, I felt braver, but still hadn't the guts to get out of bed. The footsteps got louder. Gracie groaned like she was about to wake. Then right close by, I heard whispering, and with it that dreadful smell of honey. Terrified, I leapt straight out of bed. The footsteps on the landing stopped. I crept to the door and looked back to check Gracie. She slept on. My heart beat hard as I went out onto the landing. It was empty. Then deep within the stairwell something moved. A shuffling noise echoed off the walls. "Who's there?" I whispered. The spirit had come for me. I sensed it all right. And though I was sick with fear, I needed to know what it wanted. I took the stairs slowly. Halfway down, the shuffling stopped. I hesitated. What the flip was I doing, wandering around in the middle of the night? If Mrs. Jessup caught me, I'd be for it. Something brushed against my face. My hands flew up. "Who's there? What do you want?" Silence. All around was pitch black. I was almost glad. So fearful was I of what I might see. Close to my right ear, someone drew breath. I froze. Then the speaking started, quick, hissing, rambling words that meant nothing to me but turned my blood cold. In horror, I realised the spirit had hold of my wrist. I tried desperately to pull free. The fingers gripped tighter, dragging me forwards. Before I knew it, I'd reached the bottom of the stairs. There the fingers let go. Now the footsteps started up again, this time heading off down the passage towards the green baize door. I wanted so badly just to turn and run back to bed. Yet a queer feeling seized me that I had to follow, that the spirit was demanding it, and it wouldn't let me rest until I did. The door swung open before I'd reached it. I stepped out into the empty hall. Moonlight poured in through the windows, so the paintings, the furniture, the carpets all seemed touched with silver. The house was still as the grave. I knew where the spirit was taking me. It set me shivering all over. Yet my feet moved as if by themselves, taking the stairs 2 at a time, going up and up into the shadows. It was dark inside Kit's bedchamber. My eyes took a moment to get used to it. Someone had pulled the drapes tight shut, though the fire still glowed in the grate. "Kit, are you here?" Nothing moved. "Answer me, will you?" My ears strained for the slightest sound. There was none. But something had shifted in me too. The fear had gone, and now I felt quite irked. "You got me out of bed, so what do you want?" I could hear the rising frustration in my voice. "If it ain't you doing all this, Kit, then who is it?" Nothing replied. I was very definitely alone. I turned for the door. This was pointless. There was nothing here. The spirit had gone, and I'd be in more trouble than ever if I got caught here now. But I couldn't leave, not yet. Not until I knew why I'd been brought here. My candle was fading, so I parted the curtains to let the moonlight in and looked around me. Nothing had changed since this morning. Why would it? It hadn't changed for 10 whole years. At the sight of Kit's things, my heart jolted. I'd never get used to them, not if I had to clean this room every day forever. And there were so many books here, all about fancy things I didn't understand, like poetry and history. This was the Kit I didn't know, and it made me sad in a different way. So much of him was still a stranger to me. Once upon a time, he'd been a living, breathing boy who'd rumpled his bedsheets and muddied his boots. It was proper hard to imagine the Kit I knew was the boy in the lake, a boy as fine as the stars. One book lay open. Its pages seemed to glow in the moonlight, and before I could stop myself, I'd picked it up off the table. It was a sketchbook filled with little pencil drawings of wings, wings in flight, wings folded, wings outstretched like an angel's. The very final page was all fancy letters in lots of different styles. Curly ones, bold ones, like he was practising writing something out. To my, then dear, and even a dearest. It made my heart stir, for I supposed, writing those words, he'd been thinking of his mother, and there had been a time when the two of them had been proper close. I could so easily imagine Kit sat right here, making something so beautiful. This was the boy I knew. As I put the book back in its place, a shiver passed through me. For Kit wasn't here, was he? The room was empty, dead. Even the spirit hadn't followed me inside. It struck me then there was a reason for it, that I was meant to feel this emptiness, meant to know that Kit's ghost wasn't here, for it certainly had settled lead-heavy inside me. The fire burned on, the books lay open and the bed was turned back ready, and yet all of it was mocking me. saying this won't bring him back, nothing will. He's gone forever. And this was the terrible truth that Lady Barrington just couldn't see. Nothing would ever bring Kit back. I doubted even a séance could manage it. Lady Barrington would have to live with her loss. And here I was, with my own father gone and my sister too, beginning to know what that felt like. We're going to stop there. See you tomorrow.